The phone call came at 3:12 a.m. Her name flashed across my screen, but it wasn't her voice on the other end. It was trembling, unfamiliar. A nurse. "There's been an accident," she said. The world stopped breathing for a second. The rain outside my window sounded like applause for tragedy. I grabbed my coat, my keys, my heart, and ran. When I reached the hospital, the hallway smelled like antiseptic and silence. Everything white. Everything to clean for a night that dirty. They told me she was alive barely, that she'd hit her head, that she couldn't remember anything. I didn't care about the details. I just wanted to see her. I stopped by a vending machine on my way up, bought the only flowers they had, white lilies. Her favorite? The petals shook in my hands as I walked toward her room. The door was slightly open, and there she was. The woman I loved. The woman who once called my name like it was her only prayer, now lying on a hospital bed, pale as the sheets, her hair tangled, her lips cracked but beautiful. "Lena," I whispered, my voice breaking the quiet. She turned slowly. Our eyes met, and everything inside me shattered, because she looked at me. Not like a lover reunited after chaos, but like a stranger caught in someone else's dream. Her pupils widened. Her breathing hitched. Then she looked away, quickly, like she couldn't stand to see me. "Do I know you?" The words were small, almost trembling, but they landed like a blade. The doctor beside her placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "She's suffering from temporary amnesia," he said softly, like that word could explain the hollowness that opened inside me. "She might not remember much, maybe not at all." I nodded, pretending to understand, but my mind screamed. No, this isn't memory loss. This is something else. Because even through her trembling, even through the hospital haze, I saw it. That flicker in her eyes when she said those words. Fear, not confusion. Fear of me. I stood there, frozen, as the nurse adjusted her for drip, and the clock on the wall ticked in mockery. Every second that passed felt like she was slipping further away. The woman who once loved my shadow now couldn't bear my presence. Still, I forced a smile, the kind that hides pain like a curtain hides a storm. "It's okay," I said softly, setting the lilies beside her bed. "I'm just someone who cares about you." Her lips parted, but no words came. Just silence. A silence so sharp it carved through the years we shared. When I left the room, my hands were still trembling. I didn't know if it was fear or anger. Maybe both. In the hallway, I leaned against the cold wall and tried to breathe. The sound of rain against the windows echoed like applause from ghosts. The doctor's words repeated in my head. Temporary amnesia. But her reaction wasn't the emptiness of forgetting. It was the panic of hiding. She remembered me. She just wished she didn't. The following days blurred into each, other like smudged paint on wet canvas. I visited every morning with coffee and quiet. She always looked the same, fragile, distant, pretending. The nurses thought I was devoted. They smiled when they saw me waiting in the corridor with flowers. But I wasn't devoted. I was desperate. Every time I entered her room, I looked for cracks in her performance, a flinch, a twitch, a hesitation when I spoke her name, and sometimes I saw it. When I placed the lilies by her window, she stared too long. When I mentioned the cafe where we met, her fingers tightened around her blanket. When I said love, she held her breath. Those tiny reactions, they were my proof. She remembered everything. She just didn't want to. One night, I found her room dark, except for the faint glow of a heart monitor. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. I stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "Can't sleep?" Her eyes shifted toward me, calm, cold. "You shouldn't be here this late." "I couldn't stay away," I admitted. "I keep thinking. Maybe if you see me enough, you'll remember." She looked down, her lips curving into a faint, broken smile. "Maybe you're the one who needs to forget." My heart stopped. "What does that mean?" I asked quietly, but she didn't answer. She turned her face away, feigning exhaustion. And I stood there in the half-dark, realizing I was talking to someone who didn't want to be found. The woman who once told me she'd never lie, now built her world out of lies just to erase me. The next morning, the doctor met me outside her room. He spoke kindly, but his words were knives hidden in silk. "She's showing signs of selective memory," he said. "Sometimes the mind forgets traumatic experiences on purpose." I almost laughed. Trauma. That's what she called me now. I wanted to scream to tell him that she wasn't healing. She was hiding. That she hadn't forgotten me. She'd chosen to. But I stayed silent. Because no one believes the man who says he's been forgotten. A week later, I brought her a letter. It wasn't to remind her, it was to remind myself. Inside it, I wrote everything I never said out loud. How she used to fall asleep on my shoulder. How she once told me that my voice was the only sound that made her feel safe. How we planned a future that felt endless. I placed the envelope on her bedside table. She didn't look at it. But when I came back the next day, it was gone. No one mentioned it, and neither did she. That's when I knew she'd read it. She just didn't want to talk about it. Days stretched into weeks. The air between us thickened, too heavy with things unsaid. Sometimes, I'd catch her watching me through the reflection on the window. Other times, she'd avoid me completely. It was a strange kind of torture to be seen and unseen by the same person. One afternoon, I overheard two nurses talking outside her room. "She's recovering faster than expected," one said. "Her vitals are stable. She might be discharged soon." I should have felt relieved. But all I felt was hollow, because healing for her meant disappearing from me forever. That evening, they stayed after visiting hours. The hallway lights dimmed. The world felt paused. She was asleep, or pretending to be. I sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her breathe. "Do you remember?" I whispered. "The night we got caught in the rain? You said storms made you feel alive?" Her lips moved slightly, like a dream tugging her somewhere far away. "I thought love was like rain too," I continued softly. "Beautiful, chaotic, impossible to hold." I leaned back, exhausted. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe love's not a storm. Maybe it's the silence that follows. The monitor beeped quietly, steady as her lie. When I left that night, I didn't look back. Because I knew no amount of waiting could bring back someone who chose to forget. The next morning, and she was gone. The nurse said she'd been discharged early, a surprise recovery. No goodbye. No note. Nothing. Just absence. I stood in her empty room, the bed neatly made, the lilies wilted in their vase. Her perfume still lingered in the air, faint. Haunting, that scent hit me harder than any truth ever could, because it wasn't just her memory that disappeared. It was me. Erased from her world like a name written in sand. Washed away by her guilt, I walked down the hospital hallway for the last time. Every step echoing like a goodbye I never got to say. The world outside was still raining. The sky cried for her for the lie she built, and the love she buried beneath it. And standing there in that gray drizzle, I finally understood. She didn't lose her memory. She just couldn't live with it. And that night, for the first time in my life, I felt something colder than betrayal. I felt erased. The hospital became my second home. Every hallway, every faint echo of footsteps, carried a memory of her. She played her role perfectly. The woman who had forgotten love. Soft smiles, blank stares. Her eyes were calm, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled every time I said her name. To everyone else, she looked like a fragile soul lost in fog. To me, she was a storm, pretending to be still. Her room always smelled of disinfectant and lilies. The same flowers I kept bringing, even though they wilted faster than hope. Her friends visited often. They showed her pictures of parties, laughter, faces she half recognized. She smiled politely, nodded at the right times, and when they left, her smile faded into silence. I would come in after, not with photos, but with the weight of everything we once were. "Hey," I said one afternoon, placing her favorite drink on the table, caramel latte, no sugar, just how she liked it before she decided I didn't exist. She looked up from the window. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," I said. "Old habits die hard." Her eyes darted away, and I noticed how she twisted the corner of her blanket, a habit she had when she was nervous. It was all still there. Every small detail of the woman I once knew, except the part where she pretended not to know me. I sat down beside her. "Your friends told me you're remembering bits and pieces now," I said quietly. "Faces," she whispered. "Places, but not everything." "What about people?" I asked. "People who mattered?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the window. "Sometimes faces blur together." Her words were gentle, rehearsed, the kind that sound like they were practiced in the mirror. I wanted to shake her out of it, to make her admit what we both knew. But instead, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an old photo. It was of us laughing in the rain, soaked ridiculous, happy. Her hair stuck to her face. My arm was around her. It was taken the night we promised each other forever. She stared at it for a long time. Too long for someone who'd forgotten. Her thumb brushed over the edges. Then, like a curtain falling, her expression froze. "I'm sorry," she said, voice soft. "I don't remember this." But her hand was shaking. In her pulse, I could see it racing beneath the thin skin of her wrist. I leaned closer. "You don't have to pretend." She blinked rapidly, her mask slipping for a heartbeat. Then it was back. The blank, gentle smile of a liar who's almost convinced herself. Days passed, and with every visit, her act grew sharper. She laughed at jokes she didn't understand. She thanked me for kindness I never meant as kindness. And every time she looked at me, it was with that hollow politeness that made me feel like a ghost haunting her recovery. But sometimes her eyes betrayed her, like when I brought the scarf I once gave her red. With a frayed edge from that winter night, we fought and made up under streetlights. When I placed it on her lap, she froze. Her fingers brushed it gently, almost reverently. "You used to say red meant protection," I whispered. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. "Maybe," she said. "It's pretty, I repeated. "That's all?" She nodded. "That's all." Her tears said otherwise. That night, I sat alone in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching her window glow faintly from above. The city lights reflected on the windshield like broken memories. I replayed everything, her hesitation, her trembling, her too perfect smiles. And it hit me like a slow, cruel truth. She wasn't sick. She was afraid. Afraid of the past. Afraid of me. Afraid of the guilt she'd buried beneath those white sheets. The next day, I decided to test her lie. I came earlier than usual, catching her alone. Her hair was down, her face turned to the sunlight streaming through the window. For a second, she looked peaceful. "Morning," I said. Placing my coffee on her table, she startled slightly like she hadn't expected me. Then she smiled that same careful smile. "You come here every day," she said softly. "You must have cared about me a lot." "Cared?" I echoed. "I still do." Her expression faltered. For the first time, her eyes met mine and didn't look away. I saw it, the storm beneath her calm. "Do you ever wonder," I said quietly, "if love can survive a lie?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I stepped closer. Close enough to feel her breath. Close enough for her heartbeat to betray her silence. Her hand trembled against the sheets. "Please don't. Don't." "What?" I asked. "Don't make this harder," she whispered. There it was. The confession she didn't mean to give. I smiled bitterly. "Harder for you? Or for me?" She turned away, voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I don't remember you." "Then why do you shake every time I say your name?" I whispered. She closed her eyes, but the tears escaped anyway. I left the room before she could answer. Because if I stayed, I might have begged, and I was done begging for truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain hitting my windows felt like her voice, soft, persistent. Full of things unsaid. I remembered how she once told me she wanted a love that could survive amnesia, love that left traces in the soul even when memory failed. And now here we were, living her cruel fantasy. Except she was pretending not to remember, and I was pretending not to hurt. A week later, her discharge papers were ready. Her friends threw a small celebration in her room, balloons, laughter, music. She looked radiant, even in that pale hospital gown. But when our eyes met across the noise, something fragile broke inside her. Her laughter faltered. Her gaze lingered on me a second too long. Then she looked away. After everyone left, I entered quietly. "You're leaving tomorrow," I said. She nodded. "The doctors say I'm doing better. I can see that," I said. "You've healed beautifully." My tone must have betrayed something, because her expression softened. "Don't be sad," she said gently. "People come and go. Maybe I'll remember you someday. Or maybe you already do." She bit her lip. "Why do you keep saying that?" "Because I see it in your eyes," I said, stepping closer. "Every time I walk in, you flinch. Every time I leave, you exhale like you've been holding your breath." "Tell me the truth," I whispered. "Did you really forget me, Lena?" Her silence was louder than any lie she'd told. I leaned down close enough that she could feel the weight of my words. "I'd rather be hated honestly than loved in your performance." Her tears fell, quiet and unsteady. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I couldn't face it." "Face what?" Her voice broke. "The things I did before the accident. The person I was, the person I became." She looked at me then, really looked. And for the first time I saw not the liar, not the coward, but the woman drowning in her own guilt. "I thought if I erased you," she said softly, "I could erase the pain." A long silence filled the room. The clock ticked between us, sharp, merciless. Then I said what I should have said weeks ago. "You can't erase someone who remembers for both of you." When I left that night, I didn't turn back. The hallway lights flickered behind me, and every step felt like walking away from a grave. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, cruelly peaceful. I stood under the gray sky, watching the hospital windows glow faintly above. She'd fooled the world. She'd even fooled herself. But not me, because love, real love, doesn't vanish with a bump on the head. It lingers. It haunts. It trembles when you try to lie through it, and as I walked away, I finally understood. She didn't forget me. She remembered enough to be afraid. Days bled into weeks, like ink spreading over water, slow, quiet, inevitable. Each sunrise felt the same: white hospital walls, the soft hum of machines, and the distant echo of my own stubborn hope. I kept visiting, pretending that patience could heal what truth had shattered. And she pretended that forgetting me was mercy. It was a cruel theater we played, two actors trapped in a tragedy neither of us wanted to rewrite. The nurses called me loyal. They said it like a compliment, but I knew better. Loyalty ends where self-respect begins, and mine had long since died in that sterile room where love went to rot. Every morning, I brought lilies, her favorite flowers, or at least they used to be. I'd place them in the glass vase by her bedside, but she never touched them. Not once. She'd glance at them with that unreadable calm. The same look she gave me, gentle, distant, guilty. At first I thought she didn't care. Then I realized the truth. Lily reminded her of me. And she couldn't bear to touch anything that once meant love, so I kept bringing them anyway. Not out of habit, but defiance. Because sometimes, the smallest reminders are the sharpest knives. The nurses would smile when they saw me. "She's lucky," they'd say. "Most people would have given up." I'd smile back, but inside, their words stung. Because they didn't know I had given up, just not publicly. Hope was a performance now. One eye was too tired to play, but too proud to quit. Each time I saw her, I told myself it would be the last. But then she'd turn her head, or brush her hair behind her ear the same way she used to. And I'd fall all over again, not in love, but into memory. And memory is a cruel kind of gravity. Sometimes I'd sit in silence beside her, counting the spaces between her breaths. She'd read books she didn't seem to care about, flip pages without looking. And I'd watch her, memorizing every small betrayal her body gave away. Her fingers would tighten when a love song played softly through the hospital speakers. Especially our song, the one she claimed not to remember. I once asked her if she wanted the music turned off. She said, "No, it's pretty." But her voice cracked on the word pretty. That's when I knew silence wasn't her shield, it was her punishment. One evening, I found her by the window. The sunset bled through the curtains, painting her in shades of gold and sadness. She didn't turn when I entered. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "Almost makes you forget where you are." I stepped closer. "And who you're avoiding?" Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't reply. I stood beside her, staring at the same sunset, pretending it was still the same world where she loved me. "Why do you keep coming?" she asked softly. "Because I don't know how to stop," I said. "You erased me from your mind, but not from mine." Her eyes flickered toward me, a fleeting glance, full of something dangerously close to regret. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish I could remember." "Do you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Yes." But I saw the truth swimming beneath her voice. She didn't wish for memory, she feared it. That night I walked home under a drizzle that smelled like the past. Raindrops fell against my skin like unspoken apologies. The city blurred through the wet glass of my windshield, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself she'd call. But silence followed me home, just as it always did. And in that silence, I began to notice how her absence echoed louder than her voice ever had. Weeks later, her recovery became the hospital's success story. They said her memory was improving. They said she was healing. They said I should be proud. I smiled when they said it. But inside, I felt something else dread, because healing for her meant remembering enough to leave. And I knew when that day came, I'd lose her again, this time for real. One afternoon, I brought her a small painting. It was something I'd made a habit I picked up while drowning in sleepless nights. It was a watercolor of a lily. It's half finished, its petals fading into white space. She looked at it for a long time. "What's this?" "It's us," I said simply. "Incomplete." Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. "Why would you paint something unfinished?" "Because not everything broken deserves to be fixed," I said quietly. "Some things are meant to stay undone to remind us of what we lost." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing. She placed the painting on her bedside table, right beside the vase of lilies she never touched. That's when I realized she kept every flower I brought. Even after they died, the petals had turned brown, brittle, but she never threw them away. And that, somehow, was worse than forgetting. The days grew colder. I began to notice small things, her hands trembling when I walked in. The way she stared too long at the scars on my wrist from the night. I found out about the accident. She wanted to say something. I could feel it in the air. Thick, heavy, trapped between guilt and fear. But every time she opened her mouth, silence won an eye. I was too tired to ask again, because sometimes love isn't killed by betrayal. It's buried under the weight of things never said. One evening, I stayed later than usual. The hallway lights dimmed. The night nurse gave me a knowing smile before leaving. It was just us. Her breathing, the steady beep of the monitor, and the hum of our mutual pretending. She stared at the ceiling. "Do you ever think silence can be kinder than truth?" I turned toward her. "No. Silence only delays the pain. Truth ends it." She looked at me then, eyes glassy and distant. "Sometimes ending it is the cruelest part." I didn't answer. Because she was right. Endings hurt, even when they're deserved. The rain started again, tapping softly on the window. She turned her face toward the sound. "I used to love the rain," she whispered. "I know," I said. "You said it made the world feel clean." Her lips trembled. "Not everything washes away." "No," I said. "Some things stain deeper." Our eyes met, and in that silence, everything we refused to say pressed down on us, heavy, suffocating, inevitable. When I left that night, I didn't bring new flowers. Instead, I looked at the vase of dying lilies and realized they said more than I ever could. They stood there, fragile, fading beautiful in their decay, like us. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a savior or a fool. I just felt tired. The next morning, I didn't visit. I sat in the park across from the hospital, watching strangers pass by, people who didn't know what it meant to be erased. The world was moving on. So was she. But I couldn't. Not yet, because even silence had become a language. Between us, one we both understood too well. She pretended ignorance was mercy, and I pretended hope was enough. But deep down we both knew the truth. Sometimes love doesn't die with a scream. It fades with silence. One heartbeat, one breath, one unspoken word at a time. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hospital walls, I returned for one last visit. I didn't bring flowers this time. Just myself and the resolve to let go. She looked surprised when I entered. "You came back." "I had to," I said. "One last time." Her lips parted. "To say goodbye?" "No," I whispered. "To say thank you. For teaching me that silence can be an answer to..." She looked away, tears threatening to fall. "Will you stop coming?" "Yes." "Why now?" "Because the loudest lie," I said softly, "is the one told in silence." She reached out as if to stop me, but her hand froze midway, trembling, uncertain. I stepped back, letting her hand fall. Then I smiled, not bitterly this time, but peacefully. "You can keep the lilies," I said. "Maybe one day, when they're gone, you'll realize what they meant." And before she could speak, I turned and walked out. Outside, the evening air was cold, but alive. The city lights shimmered through the rain, dropped glinting like fragments of a truth we could never say aloud. I took one last look at the window, where her shadow lingered behind the curtain. Then I whispered into the night, for her, for me, for what we once were. Sometimes silence doesn't protect us. It just delays the heartbreak. And as I walked away, the rain fell harder, not as grief this time, but as release, because finally I wasn't waiting for her to remember. I was learning to forget. End of Chapter 3, The Weight of Silence. There are moments when the world doesn't fall apart with thunder. It crumbles quietly like paper set on fire, curling at the edges while pretending to hold its shape. That's how the truth found me. Not in confrontation, not in her eyes, but in a careless sentence dropped from someone else's mouth. Like a shard of glass hidden in soft words. I was sitting in the hospital garden that day. Autumn had arrived early. The air smelled of dying leaves and unsaid things. I'd brought her another bouquet, lilies again, though they no longer meant anything. Her friend Clara joined me. She always did, talkative, kind. The kind of person who smiled to fill silence. "She's doing better," Clara said, adjusting her coat. "You should be happy. She's finally starting to live again." I nodded absently. "That's good." Clara hesitated, then added, "Her new boyfriend's been helping a lot too." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, quiet, then devastating. I blinked. "Her what?" She froze, eyes widening as if she'd just realized she'd stepped over a line. "Oh, I mean, but it was too late." The world had already stopped spinning. That night replayed in my mind, her crash. The sirens, the smell of burnt rubber, the shattered glass. I remembered how the doctors said she was lucky to be alive. How they said the trauma had wiped her memories clean. But now I saw the cracks. The way she flinched at my name. The way she avoided songs that once belonged to us. The way she said, "I wish I could remember," like a prayer she didn't believe in. It wasn't amnesia. It was choice. It was guilt with a pretty disguise. And suddenly, the lilies I brought every day, the symbol of purity, felt like mockery. I couldn't breathe. I told Clara I needed air and walked away, leaving the flowers on the bench. My hands were shaking, but not from cold. It was disbelief, the kind that sits in your chest like a knife twisting slow. In the parking lot, the rain began again. It always did when truth wanted to speak. Drops slid down my face, mixing with the taste of something bitter. Not heartbreak. Recognition. Because deep down, I had always known. I just didn't want to believe that she would choose forgetting over forgiveness. I went back inside one last time, not to see her, but to see what remained of me in that room. Her door was slightly open. I stood there unseen. She was laughing with someone, her doctor, maybe, or maybe him. The sound of her laughter, once my favorite melody, now felt like an echo from a life I'd never lived. There were no lilies in the vase, just wilted stems. She had finally thrown them away, and in their absence, I saw everything clearly. I remember the day of the crash now differently. She had been distant for weeks, her phone always out of reach, her smile rehearsed. When I asked if she was okay, she said she just needed space. I didn't know that space meant someone else. The night she left, the storm was violent, lightning slashing through the sky like judgment. I waited for her message, her call, anything. But it never came. Instead, I got a phone call from the hospital. She's been in an accident, they said. She's alive, but she doesn't remember much. What they didn't say, what I now understood, was that she didn't want to. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her from a distance, hidden in the quiet shadow of that hallway. She looked peaceful, as if she'd built a life without ever having to pay for what she destroyed, and for the first time. I didn't feel pity or love. I felt clarity. She hadn't crashed into tragedy. She had driven straight into it to escape the weight of her own choices. The accident wasn't her curse. It was her escape route, and I was the collateral damage. I turned away before she could see me. The corridor stretched long and empty, the kind of silence that makes your footsteps sound guilty. As I walked, the nurses nodded, smiled, the same empty kindness they always gave. But I wasn't one of them anymore. I wasn't the loyal lover waiting by the bed. I was a ghost who had overstayed his welcome. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. It drenched everything, the earth, the walls, my resolve. But for once, I didn't run from it. I stood there, letting it wash over me as if it could strip away the lies clinging to my skin. And in that storm, I made a decision, quiet, irreversible, necessary. I would leave, not to make her miss me, not to make her regret, but to finally start healing where she had chosen to forget. The next morning, I packed my things, the sketchbook filled with unfinished portraits of her, the folded notes she once left on my desk, the ticket stubs from the places we used to go. I didn't throw them away. I couldn't. They weren't reminders of her anymore. They were evidence of who I used to be, and I needed to remember that man, the one who loved without expecting lies. Before leaving, I wrote her a letter. It wasn't an apology or a plea, just truth. You didn't lose your memory. You buried it, and me with it. But don't worry, I'm done digging for something that wants to stay dead. Take care of yourself. You once told me silence is mercy. I finally understand. I left it on her nightstand, beside the empty vase. Then I walked out without looking back. The road outside the hospital stretched endlessly, framed by trees stripped bare by autumn. For the first time in months, I noticed how wide the world was, how much of it still existed beyond her. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and lilies, cruel, it's comforting, familiar. I didn't hate her. Not anymore. Hatred requires energy, and she had taken too much of mine already. What I felt was quieter, like the hollow ache after a wound finally stops bleeding. Freedom doesn't always feel like flight. Sometimes it feels like walking away. Days passed differently after that. I moved through time without waiting for permission. Coffee tasted like coffee again, not memory. I began painting once more, not her face, but colors. Storms, skies, fading light. Things that didn't ask for loyalty. Each brushstroke felt like a confession, not to her, but to myself. And somewhere between one canvas and the next, I started breathing again. But healing isn't a straight line. It's a circle, one that brings you back to the edge of what broke you. Just to prove you've learned how not to fall, one evening, I passed the florist near my apartment. The same one I used to visit every morning. The scent of lilies hit me like memory reborn. I froze. Then I smiled, soft, small, a quiet surrender. I didn't go inside. I just kept walking, because some flowers bloom beautifully, but only once. Sometimes I still think about her. Not with anger, with distance. I wonder if she ever found peace in that lie she built. If she still tells people she lost her memory, if she ever looks at a lily and feels the ghost of something she swore she forgot. But that's not my story anymore. It's hers. Mine began the day I walked out of that hospital, drenched, broken, but alive, as weeks turned into months. I stopped measuring my worth by the love that left me. Instead, I measured it by the silence that no longer hurt. I no longer needed to be remembered. I just needed to be free, and freedom, I realized, isn't forgetting. It's forgiving, not them, but yourself. One night, I stood on my apartment balcony, watching the rain blur the city lights below. The world looked softer in the storm, forgiving, almost kind. I whispered into the night, not for her, but for me. Some memories don't fade. They just stop asking to be healed. And as thunder rolled far in the distance, I finally understood her accident wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. They say healing begins when you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. For me, it began on a cold morning when I woke up and didn't reach for my phone. There were no messages to check, no calls to miss, no heart to wait for. Just silence, clean, sharp, and honest. That silence became my companion. It filled the spaces where she used to live, turning absence into rhythm. I threw myself into work, not because I was strong, but because I didn't know what else to do with the ruins she left behind. Every unfinished project became a distraction. Every deal a battlefield where I could reclaim something of myself. The office lights became my new sunrise. The hum of my laptop replaced the sound of her voice. And in the clatter of keyboards and late-night deadlines, I found a strange kind of comfort, a pulse that wasn't hers. They said I'd changed, that I looked colder now. Maybe they were right, but cold isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's survival. The only way to live after warmth becomes a weapon. I built my company from scratch, brick by bleeding brick. Every rejection fueled me. Every sleepless night shaped me. The same hands that once wrote her letters now signed contracts worth more than our love ever was. And for the first time, my reflection didn't look broken. It looked untouchable. I remember standing in the new office, glass walls framing the city like a painting. Rain streaked across the windows, the same kind that once reminded me of her. Now, it just reminded me that storms pass, even if they leave you unrecognizable. One night, my business partner, Ryan, caught me staring out the window, lost somewhere between exhaustion and memory. He said, people talk about you like you're some kind of machine, the man who turned heartbreak into an empire. I laughed softly. Machines don't feel. I just learned how to stop bleeding in public. He didn't understand. Most people didn't. They saw the empire I built, not the grave I buried it on. Success has a strange echo. It's loud enough to drown out pain, but quiet enough to let guilt sneak through the cracks. I often wondered if she ever thought of me while I was rebuilding myself. If her lies ever kept her awake at night the way her memory once did to me, but I never searched her name. Never asked about her again. That was part of the deal I made with myself, that healing meant erasure. And yet, sometimes the past has a way of slipping into the smallest corners of your life. A song in a cafe, a perfume in a crowded elevator, a face in a crowd that looks almost but not quite like hers. Each time my heart would twitch, then still. Proof that forgetting wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Months passed. The company grew. Magazines called me the man who rose from the ashes. They printed stories about resilience, success, redemption. None of them knew they were really writing about guilt, hers and mine. I learned that pain doesn't disappear. It just learns to dress well, to smile at meetings, to sign million-dollar deals while pretending not to flinch at old ghosts. but something inside me began to shift. One night, as I sat in my office alone, the city lights flickering like dying stars, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her. Not at the past I was. And for the first time, that emptiness didn't hurt. It felt like space. Space for something new. Something real. I started painting again. Not her face, never again, but skies, oceans, broken glass, and light. My canvases looked nothing like love, yet somehow they felt truer. Each stroke was a confession, each color a piece of peace I'd been too afraid to claim. Sometimes, when I'd finish a painting, I'd sit back and stare at it under the dim studio light. They weren't beautiful, not in the way she was, but they were honest. And honesty, I learned, is a better kind of beauty. People began noticing the change. Reporters said my company's branding had a new soul, something colder yet cleaner, sharp yet poetic. They didn't know that every campaign, every design, was a quiet eulogy for the man I used to be. Clients loved my precision. They said I had a way of seeing through illusions, of knowing when someone wasn't being real. I almost laughed. Of course I did. I had learned deception from a master. One day a young intern asked me, "Sir, how did you get here? After everything, how did you rebuild?" I looked at her so young, so untouched by betrayal, and said softly, "I didn't rebuild. I evolved." Because rebuilding suggests the same shape. And I never wanted to be that man again, the one who believed love was enough to save someone from themselves by winter. I had everything I thought I wanted. Power. Recognition.com. But one night, driving home through the city, I saw her. Or maybe just someone who looked like her. Standing at a crossing under the snowfall, face half hidden beneath an umbrella. My heart didn't race this time. It didn't ache or burn. It just paused. And in that pause, I realized how far I had come. How distance can exist not just in miles, but in memory. When the light changed, I drove on. No hesitation. No glance back. That moment, that simple, quiet choice, felt like victory. I started traveling again. New cities, new air, new skies. In Paris, I stood by the Seine at sunset, watching the light melt across the water, and whispered to no one in particular, "She's gone." And so am I, because both of us had died that day, her and her lie, me and my love. The only difference was, I found a way back. Months later, during an interview, a journalist asked, "If you could speak to the person who hurt you the most, what would you say?" I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Nothing." Silence says everything they once refused to hear. It wasn't bitterness. It was closure, the kind that doesn't need an audience. As the years unfolded, I began mentoring others, young dreamers who believed in passion more than planning. I saw versions of myself in them, reckless, loyal, naive. I never told them my story, but I taught them this. Build something that doesn't collapse when someone leaves. Because love, no matter how deep, is never a foundation. It's whether beautiful, unpredictable, temporary. One evening, I received a letter. No return name. Just familiar handwriting. My pulse skipped, not in fear, but recognition. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my desk for hours, untouched, like a ghost knocking politely at a closed door. When I finally tore it open, there were only a few words. "I remember now. I'm sorry. Can we meet?" The ink was shaky, as if written with trembling hands. But my hands didn't tremble. I folded the letter, placed it inside a drawer, and locked it. Not out of cruelty, but mercy. For both of us, some stories don't need sequels. They just need silence. That night, I stood by my window again, the city glittering below. I realized that peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly when you stop looking for it, I whispered to the rain. I'd forgotten her name. And for the first time, it wasn't an act of defiance. It was truth. I looked around my office, the paintings, the awards, the life I'd built from ashes. Every piece of it was proof that pain could become purpose, that heartbreak could become architecture. that forgetting isn't a failure of love, it's the final form of strength. I turned off the lights and walked out. The sound of rain fading behind me. Outside, the world smelled new again, like beginnings, like breath, like freedom. And as I stepped into the night, I realized I hadn't just risen from ruin, I had rewritten it. Rain has a strange way of returning memories you thought you buried. It was pouring that afternoon, the kind of rain that blurs the world into watercolor sadness. I was in my office, lost in the quiet hum of paperwork and glass reflections, when my secretary knocked. "Sir, someone's here to see you." Her voice hesitated, like it had touched something fragile. Before I could answer, the door opened, and there she was. It took me a second to recognize her. Not because time had changed her face, but because guilt had. She stood in the doorway, drenched, trembling, her once steady eyes red and swollen. The woman who once smiled like she owned the sun now looked like she hadn't seen light in years. "I remember now," she whispered, voice cracking between sobs. For a moment, time folded. The walls, the rain, the heartbeat of the city, everything stilled. Like the universe was holding its breath. But I didn't move. I just stared. At the woman who once erased me from her life like a line she regretted writing. Her hair clung to her cheeks. Her mascara ran like melted ink. She looked both lost and desperate, a ghost begging for a second life. "I remember everything," she said again, stepping closer. "The night of the accident, the lies, the way you looked at me when I pretended I didn't know you." Her voice broke on that word, pretended. It hung in the air like smoke, refusing to fade. I wanted to feel something, anger, pity, sorrow. But all I felt was distance, the kind of distance that comes after you've healed so much. The past can't reach you anymore. She moved closer, her trembling hands clutching the strap of her bag like it was the only thing holding her together. "I didn't know how to face you," she said, her words rushing out like confession. "After what I did, after who I became, I thought if I could forget, maybe you could too. But I was wrong." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Wrong?" She nodded, tears spilling freely. "I thought forgetting was mercy, but it was punishment. Every day, I remembered pieces. Your voice, your hands, the way you used to wait outside my door with lilies. And it killed me." Her words fell heavy between us, but my heart didn't stir, because while she was busy remembering, I had learned to live without her memory at all. I turned away, walking to the window. The city outside glimmered beneath the rain, blurred lights, silent streets, people rushing nowhere. Everything looked washed, clean, alive. Everything she'd watch. She followed me quietly, the sound of her heels clicking softly, an echo of what used to be. "You've changed," she whispered. I smiled faintly at my reflection in the glass. "People do." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're colder." I met her eyes through the reflection. "Colder is just another word for healed." She froze at that, her breath hitching. Then, as if the dam broke, she stepped forward, voice trembling. "I came to say I'm sorry," she said, tears glistening under the soft office light. "I shouldn't have lied. I shouldn't have run. I thought I could start over, but I couldn't." Every smile felt borrowed, every moment hollow. "You were the only real thing I ever had," her voice cracked again. And for a second, just a second, I almost remembered how it felt to love her. But memory isn't resurrection. It's just a ghost whispering through locked doors. I turned slowly, facing her at last. The same woman who once looked at me like I was her forever now looked like she'd finally met her ending. Her hands were shaking. Her lips trembled around the next words, "I still love you." The words should have broken me once. Now, they just sounded like an echo, too far, too faint, too late. I took a step closer, close enough to see the tears clinging to her lashes, close enough to see the regret that had hollowed her eyes. "Do you know what love is?" I asked softly. She blinked. "What?" "Love isn't pretending someone doesn't exist. It's not hiding behind lies because the truth scares you." I paused, my voice steady now, not cruel, just final. You didn't lose me, Elise. You threw me away. Her face crumpled. I know. I smiled, sad, distant. No, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be here asking for a past that doesn't exist anymore. She took another step, her voice desperate now. Please, I just want a chance to make it right. To explain, I stopped her with a look. Explain? I whispered. After all this time? She nodded, trembling. I wasn't myself back then. I was scared. The other man don't, I cut in sharply. Don't rewrite it now. Lies don't become truth just because they finally start to hurt. Her eyes widened at my tone. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. My calm was punishment enough. For a long time, we just stood there, two people connected by a story that no longer belonged to either of us. The rain outside softened to drizzle, tapping gently against the window like a clock winding down. Finally, she whispered, "You hate me." I shook my head. No, hate is passion. You have to matter to be hated. Her tears fell faster then, silent and helpless. Then what am I to you now? She asked. I looked at her at the ruins of what used to be beautiful and said quietly, just a lesson. As she staggered back a little as if the words themselves had weight. Her lips parted, but no sound came. In that silence, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't about saying it's okay. It's about finally understanding that it never will be, and learning to live with that peace. She stood there, her breath shallow, her eyes flickering between hope and despair. I thought, if I remembered, it would fix something, she murmured. It doesn't, I said. Memory isn't healing. It's just a mirror showing what we already lost. A long pause followed, the kind that stretches across years of unspoken words. Then she whispered, Can we start over? I walked past her, toward the door. My hand rested on the handle as I said, Some stories lose their meaning when told too late. And then, without looking back, I added quietly, Who are you again? The door clicked shut behind me. But her silence followed, the kind that doesn't echo, because even the walls knew the story had ended. Outside, the air smelled of rain and closure. I stood under the awning of the building, watching the storm calm into drizzle, the city lights blurred, golden and distant. Somewhere behind that glass, she was probably still standing, drowning in the very silence she once gave me. I lit a cigarette, the first in years. Not because I needed it, but because it felt like punctuation. The end of a sentence I'd been rewriting for far too long. As I exhaled, the smoke rose and vanished into the night. Like her name from my memory. Like her love from my heart. Later that night, I found myself back at the studio, where my unfinished paintings waited. The canvas stood blank, pale, endless, patient. For months I hadn't known what to paint next, but now I did. Not her, not us. Just a window open to rain, with lilies on the sill, fresh, white. Untouched, because sometimes closure isn't in confrontation. It's in creation. I painted until dawn. Each stroke washed away the last fragments of her voice. Each color replaced a memory. And when I was done, the painting looked like peace. Not perfect, just still. I stepped back, wiped my hands, and whispered to the quiet she remembered too late. The morning light slipped in through the blinds, warm and forgiving. It fell on my face like a benediction, and for the first time, I felt lighter than the rain. Some stories end with a kiss. Ours ended with a question and silence answering back, but maybe that's what love really is. In the end, not forever, but transformation. And as the city woke beneath the dawn, I finally understood to forgive isn't to forget. It's to look at what once destroyed you and feel nothing at all. The rain hadn't stopped since she arrived. It was still falling, steady and relentless. As if the sky itself was grieving for a story that had no happy ending left to tell. She stood there in front of me, her tears blending with the rain streaking down the glass wall behind her. Her voice trembled, carrying the ghost of a love that used to exist between us. Do you remember? She whispered, the park bench near the old library, The one where you told me forever didn't scare you? Her words hung in the air like the smoke from a dying candle. They didn't burn anymore. I leaned against my desk, silent, watching her fall apart piece by piece. She clutched her chest like her heart had finally caught up with her lies. Her voice broke. You said you'd never stop waiting for me. I let out a quiet breath. I didn't. You just stopped showing up. That silenced her. Her lips trembled as if the truth itself had struck her. The sound of the rain filled the space between us, heavy, rhythmic, merciless. She tried again, her words desperate now. Pulling from the fragments of the past like a drowning woman reaching for the surface. Remember that night by the sea? You said my name like it was the only word that ever mattered. I can still hear it. I can still feel it. Oh, her voice cracked. I thought love like that doesn't die. I looked at her, this trembling stranger wearing the face of the woman I once loved, and said quietly, "It doesn't die. It changes." She blinked, confused. Into what? Into silence, I whispered. Into peace. Into something that doesn't need to hurt anymore. Her tears fell harder, chasing each other down her cheeks, fragile and endless. I never wanted to hurt you, she said. I was scared. I didn't know how to love without destroying everything around me. I nodded slowly. And you did. You destroyed us. That truth hit her like thunder. She staggered a step back, her fingers clutching the edge of the desk for balance. The sound of her sobs filled the room, raw, broken, human. But even her pain couldn't reach me anymore, because the version of me who once lived for her tears had died the day she chose someone else. She wiped her face with trembling hands, smearing her mascara into black streaks. Her once perfect composure, the charm, the grace, was gone. What remained was just regret wearing her name. Do you really feel nothing? She asked softly, almost to herself. Not even when you see me cry like this? I hesitated, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I finally did. I used to think your tears meant something, I said quietly. That if you cried, it was proof you cared. But now I know. Tears aren't love. They're just water trying to rewrite the past. She shook her head, her voice breaking. I'm not trying to rewrite it. I'm trying to make it right. I sighed, walking toward the window. The city beyond was veiled in mist, gray, heavy, distant. Each drop of rain looked like a memory hitting the ground and vanishing. You can't fix what you buried alive, I said. You didn't lose me, Elise. You erased me. And now, you're here trying to remember a story I already outgrew. For a moment, there was nothing. Just rain and silence, then she said the one thing I didn't expect. I still love you. The words echoed through the room, soft, trembling, desperate. Once that confession would have undone me, but now it just sounded like a ghost, knocking on a door I no longer lived behind. I turned to her slowly, the weight of years settling in my chest. I believe you, I said. But that doesn't change anything. She froze, confusion mixing with pain. What do you mean? Love isn't enough anymore. Her knees seemed to weaken. She gripped the edge of the table, his eyes searching mine for any sign of the man she once knew. I kept everything, she said in a whisper. Your letters, the photos. Even the lilies you gave me that night before. Stop, I said sharply, my voice slicing through her words like lightning. The mention of lilies, my favorite flowers. The ones I used to bring to her hospital bed, felt like a wound reopening. She flinched at my tone, but pressed on, trembling. They dried, but I couldn't throw them away. It felt like throwing you away all over again. Her words were sincere. But sincerity doesn't erase consequences. I walked toward her, slow, deliberate steps. Her breath caught when I stopped just a few inches away. You kept those lilies? I said quietly. But you never kept me. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. My gaze softened, not with affection, but with understanding. I'm not angry anymore, Elise. I'm just done. Her tears fell faster. Don't say that, she begged. Please don't say it like that. I smiled faintly. Like what? Like you mean it. She reached out, her trembling hand brushing against mine. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if she was touching something sacred she had once broken. And for a moment, I didn't pull away. For a moment, I let her feel the warmth she thought she'd lost forever, but then I stepped back. Her hand lingered in the air. Empty. That single step was enough to tell her everything. "You used to fight for me," she whispered, her voice a thread. "You said you'd never stop." "I did fight," I said softly. "You just stopped being worth the war," she gasped. Not from anger, but realization. Because deep down, she knew it was true. Outside, thunder rolled deep and distant, like the sky itself was grieving, the last chapter of something beautiful. The lights flickered, reflecting off her tears like diamonds on cracked glass. She whispered my name, once, twice, each time softer, as if trying to summon the version of me that used to answer it. But he was gone, and I didn't move. She finally broke. Sobs racked her body as she sank to her knees, clutching her chest like the pain was physical. "I can't lose you again," she cried. I stood still. Every instinct in me wanted to reach for her, to lift her, to comfort her. But healing doesn't always come from kindness. Sometimes it comes from letting someone taste their own regret. When her sobs quieted, she stood shakily, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling, and then she whispered, broken but resolute, "I'll wait. No matter how long it takes, I'll wait until you forgive me." I looked at her, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then you'll wait forever." Her eyes widened. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The rain, the air, everything. Then she nodded slowly, her lips trembling into a sad smile. "I deserve that," she said softly. And with those words, she turned toward the door. Her footsteps echoed faintly, each one sounding like the end of a song. At the door, she stopped. Without turning around, she whispered, "I hope someday, when it rains like this, you'll remember me kindly." I didn't answer, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The door closed behind her. The silence that followed was deeper than anything I'd ever known. Not empty, but peaceful. Like an exhale I'd been holding for too long. I walked to the window. Outside, the rain had softened to mist. The city lights shimmered through it, blurred but beautiful. For the first time, I realized I didn't need to forget her. I just needed to outgrow the part of me that still loved her. Later that night, I found myself walking through the quiet streets alone. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the scent of it, clean, new, forgiving. I passed by a flower stall. The vendor, an old man with kind eyes, smiled and said, "Lilies tonight, sir?" I paused, looking at the white blooms, soft, fragile, pure. Once, they were a symbol of us. Now, they were just flowers again. "No," I said gently. "Not tonight," he nodded, and I walked on. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled one last time before fading into silence. And I knew the storm was over, not outside, inside. That night, I slept without dreams, without memories clawing at my chest, without her voice echoing in my head. It was quiet, still, peaceful, and in that stillness, I understood love doesn't always end when someone leaves. Sometimes, it ends when you finally stop looking back. Time didn't heal me. It simply taught me how to live without bleeding. The days became quieter after she left. No more trembling messages. No more apologies that arrived too late. Just the steady hum of life, the sound of a heart learning how to beat without. Breaking, it's strange how silence can grow on you. At first, it feels unbearable, heavy and suffocating. But eventually, it becomes a kind of peace. The kind that doesn't ask for answers or promises. The kind that simply is. Months passed. Then years. The world changed around me. But I didn't chase it anymore. My company expanded. My name was whispered in rooms I once thought were unreachable. People saw success. I saw survival. Every achievement was a scar turned gold, proof that pain can build empires if you let it. But no matter how bright my world became, there was always one shadow that followed, faint, familiar, harmless. Her, I'd see her sometimes. In crowded streets, At the edge of cafes I used to take her to, always sitting alone, always looking smaller than I remembered. She didn't notice me. Or maybe she did and couldn't bring herself to look. Her once perfect posture was replaced by something fragile, like she was carrying the weight of memories. She once swore she'd lost. They said she never fully recovered, that she had moments, flashes of pain that hit her like lightning, that she woke up some nights calling my name as if her mind was trying to replay the love it once erased. I never went to her, because I knew some ghosts are better left uncalled. I remember one evening, winter, cold enough to sting. I was walking home when I saw her outside the florist near my office, the same florist where I used to buy lilies. She stood there for a long time, staring at the flowers through the glass. Her hand lifted, hesitated, and then fell, like she wanted to reach for something she no longer had the right to touch. I almost called out to her. But then I remembered she had already said her last words, and I had already given her mine, so I walked past her. Our shoulders brushed for half a second. She froze. I didn't. For the first time, I realized that forgetting isn't always about erasing memories. Sometimes it's about remembering without pain. When I got home that night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat by the window. The city lights flickered below like 1,000 half-forgotten wishes. I thought about how love had once consumed me, how her voice, her scent, her lies had filled my lungs like air now. There was nothing left but a soft ache, distant, weightless, an ache that didn't hurt anymore. And in that stillness, I whispered something to myself. I never thought I'd say, "I forgive you." Not for her. For me, because forgiveness, I realized, isn't about setting the other person free. It's about unlocking the door they left you behind and walking out yourself. Weeks later, I heard she'd moved to a smaller apartment across town. She had quit her job. She didn't see many people anymore. A mutual friend mentioned she'd been painting lately, mostly ocean scenes. Blue waves, empty skies, and in every canvas, a single figure standing at the edge of the shore, looking away. She said the figure had no face. I didn't need to ask who it was meant to be. One day I received a letter. No return address. No signature. Just my name written in trembling handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't die even when love does. Inside was a single line. "Do you ever think of me?" That was it. No explanation. No apology. I placed the letter on my desk, beside my coffee mug, and stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote my answer beneath it. Not anymore. Didn't send it. Some words are meant to stay unspoken, not out of cruelty, but closure. Months turned into another year. Life settled into a rhythm I didn't need to control. I learned to find comfort in small things again, the quiet hum of rain on the balcony, the warmth of morning light through glass, the laughter of strangers that didn't remind me of her anymore. Sometimes I'd still pass the old hospital where her lie was born. It looked smaller now, less haunting. The corridors that once held my heartbreak had become just walls, just floors, just time. And I realized places don't hold pain. And I wasn't that person anymore. Then, one evening, fate crossed our paths again. It was raining, of course it was. Every story that begins in the rain should end in it too. I was sitting in a cafe, reviewing some designs on my laptop. When I saw her across the street, she stood under a broken umbrella, hair damp, coat faded. She looked lost, not physically, but in a way that went deeper. Our eyes met through the glass. For a second, the world fell silent. The rain slowed. The air thickened with ghosts. Her lips parted, as if my name had found its way back to her tongue. But I didn't move, because in that moment, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. I couldn't remember her name, not because I was trying to forget, but because the part of me that used to hold her had finally let go. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Maybe she expected recognition. Maybe she still believed our story had some unfinished line, but there was none. She gave a faint, broken smile, The kind people give when they finally understand they're not remembered anymore. Then she turned and walked away, slowly, without looking back. And I sat there, staring at the raindrops racing down the glass, realizing that this was how peace looked: quiet, irreversible, complete. I finished my coffee. The taste was bitter, but it didn't sting. I walked out into the rain, letting it soak my shoulders, my hair, my past. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement like tiny shards of memory, fragments of a life I had finally outgrown. People brushed past me, laughing, running, living, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Light. Like I was no longer carrying someone else's unfinished story. Later that night, I sat at my desk again, the same place where I once wrote her name 100 times, trying not to forget it. Now the paper before me was blank, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to fill it. Some stories, I've learned, don't need an ending. They just need silence. I looked out the window at the city breathing beneath me, neon lights flickering like tiny heartbeats. Somewhere out there, she was still alive, still remembering, still regretting. But she didn't belong in my world anymore. And maybe that was the most merciful thing of all. Because sometimes, the worst punishment isn't hate. It's indifference. It's being truly forgotten by the one person you thought would never let you go. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and whispered into the quiet, not for her, not for the past, but for myself. Goodbye. The word didn't ache. It just fit. And in that single breath, I realized something profound. The opposite of love isn't hate. It's peace. Now, when people ask about her, I smile politely. She was someone I used to know, I say. And that's all she is now. A name that no longer burns. A memory that no longer bleeds. A chapter I don't reread. They say she still paints. That her last exhibition was called Echoes. The centerpiece was a single canvas, a faceless man standing in the rain, surrounded by lilies. They said it sold instantly. The buyer remained anonymous. Maybe it was her way of saying she finally remembered everything. And maybe buying it was mine, my quiet way of saying I didn't need to. That painting hangs in my study now, not as a wound, but as a lesson. A reminder that even the most beautiful lies fade with time every morning. Sunlight touches it softly, and for a moment, the man in the painting almost looks at peace. Maybe he is. Maybe I am too. Because the woman who once faked forgetting me now lives with the punishment of being truly forgotten. And I live free.